Everyone here? No. All right. Are we ready to call to order? So I'd like to call to order the Brattleboro Housing Partnerships Board of Commissioners meeting on today at 4:33 p.m. on January 13th, 2025. Um, and first I'd like to start with reviewing the minutes from December 16th, 2024, the regular meeting. Any questions or edits needed? May I have a motion
Oh,
to?
I think Michelle's talking. She's
Oh,
just
Oh,
muted.
sorry, I was going to make a motion to accept the minutes of the December 16th, 2024 regular meeting.
great.
And I will second them.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. So do we have any resident or citizen participation? Now's the time. For any questions or comments? No? Okay. All right. So, next, I would need a potential motion to open the public hearing to discuss the HUD 2025-2026 annual plan and the HUD 2025-2030 5-year plan. May I have a motion?
A motion that we open.
Great. May I have a second?
Second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. So, the first document that we were given was the streamlined annual PHA plan. So Christine, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Great, thanks.
So as we talked a little bit about this last month as well. So every year the Housing Authority is required to submit an annual plan. And we, at this point, for this annual plan, we reported out on what we have been doing so far and any major changes to any of our programs within the HUD programs. And at this point, we are not asking for any major substantial changes. However, we did report out and we did also share some progress that we've made some changes through the MTW plan. And then for the 5-year plan, we also we shared a little bit about the changes that we have made that have been substantial changes. Some of those were the rent determination revisions and our changes to the family self-sufficiency program. We also put our 5-year strategic plan into this to share what our goals were. And then I also included the metrics of the 5-year strategic plan and where we are with our progress results, which we had reported out on in April of 2024. As I think I mentioned in the last meeting as well, that if we do have any other substantial changes that we would have to, we probably will have a change to the 5-year plan in the next few years, specifically around maybe some of the redevelopment that we're doing, some of the other programs that might be changing through our MTW waivers. And at that point, we would have to submit a revision to the plan.
I had no questions. I thought it looked complete and it's just really remarkable the work that's happened, and I feel like it does capture quite a bit of that. All the impact, actually. I have no problems or questions.
Yeah,
So,
agreed. A lot of good detail here. Thank you for that.
yeah, this was a lot of detail. I really appreciate it. I just had a question. So this was all the progress reported up until the end of 2024?
No,
Oh,
it includes, if you had any substantial changes, I wanted to add that to the plan, but then it's really projecting what we'll be doing going forward.
right.
So if we're projecting any potentially large changes, we might, I'm guessing for the 5-year plan, we will have some changes that we'll have to add at some point, and then we'll have to do a revision.
Okay. I was just thinking with the progress that was reported about BOHOI, and it said that we have one board chair, but actually we have several new members now, so
Yeah, we
I
do.
wasn't sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that progress report, when we did the metrics, I submitted that at the end of our fiscal year. I'll do that again as we submit to this fiscal year because believe it or not, we'll be starting to think about our next strategic plan. It feels like we just completed, but we'll be probably doing that work in the next fiscal year. And so that will be a good time to report out. And then I don't, want to jump forward too much, but we have been working on the other additional metrics that the board had proposed. And so I have a report out to that at the end. So I think that will also give us some of the data that was missing from this, specifically around, I think like we wanted to measure the complaints, we want to do a survey. So we've already drafted a potential survey to go out to residents, which I want to bring to the board in the next month or so to talk about that and then have that go out in the beginning of the fiscal year. So I've been working with Evernorth to draft that survey. So I think some of the metrics that we completed a lot, but what we haven't completed, I think that will fill in some of those gaps. So you're right. Yeah. And BHOI now has 4 members instead of 1, which is really great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. Any other questions or proposed changes? No? Great. This was really great to see everything and a lot of work. So appreciate it. Okay. Are we ready to close the public hearing if there isn't anything else?
Motion to close the public hearing.
May I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. So now that we're in the regular meeting, I will need a motion to accept the HUD annual plan for the fiscal year 2024, 2025 as presented.
Actually, that's a typo. It should
Oh,
be 20. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. 2025, 2026.
2026.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Annual plan for the fiscal year of 2025, 2026, as presented and with no changes.
Motion to accept.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. I will also need a motion to accept the HUD 5-year plan for 2025 to 2030 as presented with no changes.
I make a
Motion to accept.
May I have a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So we're ready to move on to staff reports. And first is the executive director report. So is there any questions or anything notable you'd like to add, Christy?
The only thing I would say is, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we have received funding for an additional family self-sufficiency coordinator. So that means we'll have two now, which is great because we've really grown our program tremendously in the last year. We're up to 91 participants, and we have more people who would like to be part of the program who are either a senior or adult with a disability. And so now we'll be able to add those people to the program. Before we had capped it on just people who who were mandated to be in the program. So that's really exciting. And I think that we're going to see a lot of progress with the growth of that program because of this. We've started to use over the last year the new software for Apricot, and that's really helped us to um, really measure some of the results of the program. And so I think that has been really beneficial. And but we were getting a little nervous that we had so many people in the program that we weren't going to be able to actually, meet everybody's needs. So that's excellent news. We also hired a new maintenance technician. We had a maintenance technician who had left after 27 years of service. I think we were very sad to see him leave. It's taken us a while to find another person that we really liked, but we did have someone start today, which is really exciting. I think he's going to fit right in. He had been a maintenance worker at the Brattleboro Hospital for a long time, and we really, we're really excited to work with him. So I think this might be, a different, realm, but it's still within the Brattleboro community. So I think that's great. Other than that, we're really looking at our capital improvements for next year. So I've been working with the maintenance manager on those pieces and looking at some sort of planning for that for our budget. And lastly, I just wanted to give, I don't know how many of you saw this, but Burlington Housing Authority had put out a press release this past week about having to cap their Section 8 program and cut back. And you probably saw in the Vermont Digger. So we did meet with, I met with Burlington Housing Authority today, as well as Vermont State Housing and other housing authorities around the state. We've been really assessing our program over the past couple of weeks when we first received notice that there was a potential cutback of 3% to the program. And we're in a place right now where we don't need to do anything. We don't need to take any subsidy, take anybody off the wait list who has been searching. We're really in a position right now where we don't need to make any changes. We'll wait and see what the end result is. But at this point, we are not having to modify our program. Burlington Housing Authority is a much bigger housing authority. They have many more vouchers. So 3% to them makes a huge, huge difference. For us, I think we've been very conservative with our program in general. And so I think we've been working on these assessments with our fee accountant and also with the Section 8 manager, and we're feeling comfortable where we are. If there's any other changes, I would, of course, let the board know right away. But I think in the next couple of months, I will invite David to come again to the meeting and we can discuss this a little further, maybe with James. This is not a great time of year for him because it's the end of the calendar year and he's very busy. But I think he would be able to free up some time maybe in February or March, and we could really dive in and give you a better understanding of what that is and what the impact could potentially be.
Thank you. May I ask the name of the new maintenance person?
Yes, Daniel Santini.
Santino.
Santino.
Yeah,
Okay. Did
I
you know
know
this
him.
person?
Yes.
I feel like this is a trick question.
No, I just know Dan.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah,
Awesome. That's
I
gonna be
had
really
not
great.
met him until today, although I talked to him a few times, and I think he's going to be a good fit. It seems like he's excited to be here, so we're excited to have him.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, welcome, Dan.
yeah.
Great. Any other questions about the executive director's report? No? Okay. How about the resident services and staffing director report? The pink one.
Right?
Mhm. Any questions or comments?
Appreciation for all that work.
Mhm. I had the pleasure of meeting the new staff, Doug Wilcox and Hussein Abdali, and at the holiday, and I just want to welcome them formally. Um, and uh, so I'm excited to see if the next report some of the progress that they'll be making. I have high hopes for them. So um, but see that they have completed their training. So excited for that. Um, so the um the changes in income, was there anything like notable in this new graph? Because this looks a little bit, this graph looks it'll like it's new from what we
Yeah,
usually get.
so it's a little hard. Yeah, I had to get a little bit of an explanation on it because I was unsure. So the top graph, and I apologize, it is so tiny. So don't focus on the numbers. Focus on just like the direction things are going
Okay.
to start with. So the top graph is changes in income. So
Mhm.
don't look at the numbers because it just makes it a little bit more confusing. But that's so basically this is only the people who are in the FSS program, which we've renamed the LEAP program, which is learning, employment, academics program. And so the first one is so all the people who are currently in the program, this is tracking where their income, if their income has gone up or down. And so I think the hard part is like if somebody leaves the program because they move out, then it's going to automatically go down. But we really wanted to see over time that like the incomes are growing, right? That people in the program's incomes are going up. And you'll see like if you follow the graph, it really is going up, even though it went a little bit down this month because somebody had lost a job that was a pretty substantial job. It's still continuing to go up from the beginning. So that's really good news.
So
Um,
it's their everybody's cumulative income or it's the change?
It's the top is the cumulative income.
Mhm.
So that's why it's a little confusing. So like when we started the program, right? We only had, so to be fair, we only had, and this will show up more next year, right? Because the program started, let's say January, right? When we really started tracking, we didn't have a lot of people in the program at that point. So the total income was $5,000. It doesn't mean that so we've added people to the program. So I think what's really important is to look at like August and September was when we required everyone to be in the program who was eligible for the program had to sign up by September. So if you look at August and September and July, that's when people really started to get in the program. And that's when you started to see like the wages really going up. If you look at September, 193,000, that that's sort of like that's when everybody was officially in the program. And then it continued to go up to 204, then 235, and then down to 190, right? And so hopefully what's going to end up happening is that's cumulatively everybody in the program. That's everyone that's required to be in the program is in the program at this point. So in the next year, we're really going to see what the difference is. I think the other piece that would be interesting, like when I met with Matt today, was like, well, how do we figure out like what the average is like what would be more meaningful? Would it be this is meaningful, but like would it be more meaningful to have it be per person average or like per person change? We might get to that point where we want to dive in a little further and we'll be able to with the software, but I think for the basics, like because we're just getting it rolling, I think this is where we were starting. And then, so what we really want to see, what we're hoping to see, right, is that incomes are continuing to increase. What we also wanted to see is that because we made these changes in the rent recertification being every 3 years, and that if their income goes down, they can recertify and then they'll be able to lower their rent, but we're not necessarily raising rent for anybody if their income goes up, that over time the changes in rent will go down. This is when you really shouldn't look at the numbers because they're very confusing to me. I did not understand them. Matt had to explain it to me. But that means that basically every month, like it's the number of the number that it went up. So if you look in the middle, if you look at June, July, and August, those three numbers stay the same. Nobody's rent changed at all. But if you looked at the graph and you looked at the numbers, you might think, well, it changed $2.03 thousand every month, but it didn't. It stayed exactly the same. And then it went down, and then it went down again, and then went down, and it's going down even further. So the hope is that the rents either plateau or go down further. This is the rent contribution that people pay while their incomes are going up, because we're hoping that people during this period where they're not being recertified are going to be able to have more money in their pockets for other things. And then we're also hoping that then like rents go, like the amount that people pay, like the total amount percentage of people paying rent goes up, right? Because they'll have more money in their pocket. I see your face is confused, Michelle. Ask.
So don't you want to see the changes in rent being flat? Because everybody's just expected to pay the same amount of rent as they did before.
It could be, or yes, we could want it to be flat, or we want it, or go down, but we don't necessarily want it to go up.
Yeah. And why would it have gone down?
Like, so it could go down potentially so this is cumulative, right? So if somebody lost a position or their income goes down, then if it's above an income change is over 10%, then we would adjust their rent for it to go down. So when I talked to Matt today, I said, well, what I think would be what would be helpful for me would be to know the total rent, the same as we're looking at the total income, looking at the total rent contribution per month, per person, with the total income contribution per person. I think that would be a better gauge. And then if we wanted to average it out, we could average it out per household, and that would give us a better understanding.
And I see why it's titled changes, because that's what we're interested in understanding. But this is not a measure of change. This is a cumulative measure of income.
Yeah. And that's why I think when I met with him, I was like, I think he was really thinking of it one way, and I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I was like, well, let's think about it this way. And so I think we're getting closer to where we are. But to be fair, it's the first year of the program. We're trying to build in these metrics, and there's a lot of different metrics that we're measuring. And so I think he was wanting to measure change, but I think at this point we're at the point where we should measure the amount, and then we will see the change as it graphs out. Yeah.
And it's good news.
Yeah, that is good news. It means it's working, and it also means that people have signed up for the program, which was our big fear, that even though it was mandatory, people weren't going to participate. And so, so that's a really good news too. And people's incomes are going up, and we want, that's really exciting to see.
Great, thank you. So are we ready to move on to the Section 8 administrative report? If so, any questions or comments? That's the yellow one. No questions or comments? Anything notable, Christine?
No, I mean, since this has come out, since David wrote this information about our program has been, coming to light. So I think next month you'll see more information about that from him.
Great, thank you. So the financial review is next, the November 2024 monthly comparable. So I always like to ask if there's anything notable for this, or any questions.
No, I will just say, I'm excited to see December's report so that we can kind of close out the third quarter and then be ready to prepare for the fourth quarter. We're in a really, so far we're in a pretty good place. We haven't, knock on wood, had a lot of snow. I mean, some of it is, things out of our control, like snow expenses, extreme weather, extreme cold, extreme heat. We've had a pretty mild, knock on wood, year. And so that definitely impacts our contract costs. Um, I would say other than that, we're exactly where the employee benefits are a little bit higher than when we thought. We knew that was going to be the case. Um, Other than that, there's nothing that's really standing out that seems really out of whack at this point. I think it's just, the ebb and flow of what we projected. I think the good news is our projections have been pretty spot on, and we've been able to stay within the boundaries of the budget, which has been really, really good. I think the only other thing maybe to make a note of that I think we pointed out last month, because if you look at the last two pages, there's a whole page that identifies the reserve accounts, which I thought would be helpful for the board to have an idea of like what we have put aside in um, our our mandatory reserves, but also, like our laundry accounts and our replacement reserves and our Section 8 checking and reserve. So having a better understanding of where we fall with those. And then the last page is the new edition of the BHOI budget and where we are with the different grants. And that I think is helpful to look at as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we can get to this when we talk to BHOI, but I'll just tell you that they are slated to really start diving into the budget. Uh, not this month, not at our January meeting because we're still working on the bylaws, but at the February meeting, that's sort of like our next task after the bylaws is diving in and getting a better understanding of the budget. It's kind of good timing because this will be the first year that we actually have to file taxes. I mean, we've always had to file a form that basically says like we didn't have enough money to actually need um, to file a formal tax, to to formal a formal tax report, but we will be filing a report this year, and so we have asked Markham, who does our annual audits, to help in that process.
What's the reporting structure for BHOI again? They report to you, Christine? Are you the liaison with us or is there any?
I'm the liaison with you, and there is like, so if they decide to make like, so we did create some formal language where if they report to, if they want to raise money in a certain area, then they need to check in with this board to then determine if that aligns with the BHA values, and then BHA approves, and then they go forward with their reporting. Yeah. I am a member, now I can't think of the right term. I'm a participant, I'm a member, but I'm not a full board member. I mean, I can't remember the right legal term, but they voted me.
Ex officio, ex
Yes.
officio, that one?
Yes, yeah. Yeah. And so they will, I think once their feet are more settled on the ground, then they'll submit a report every month to the board, like a basic report of like, oh, we met, da da da, this. And then if they have any new initiatives they want to take, then they'll bring that to the board. But I will be the one that's probably reporting out to them, to you. Like, I doubt that they're going to attend this meeting. Does that make sense?
Great. Any other questions about the financial review? Okay. Any questions about the check signing listing report? Okay, we're gonna need check signing assignments. So we have Michelle for January, right? Who do we have for February? Can't remember, sorry, and it's not
That's
here.
okay. I think I have it in the minutes.
Oh,
Sorry, let me hold it 1 sec. Mm,
February's Commissioner Walker, March Chair Underwood.
okay.
I might as well do April.
So we have Commissioner Green for April. Great. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so next is special projects, and we have Daniel Riddlehover, the Director of Project Development, um, to discuss the Melrose redevelopment project. Hi, welcome.
Hi, hello. I'm happy to jump right in. Christine, if you wanted to queue me up, I'll defer to that also. So you
all right.
let me know.
Okay, I'll just say, I'm really excited to have Dan here. We met last week or the week before, I can't even remember anymore, Dan. And we talked a little bit about him coming and giving us a report out, and then also talking about next steps. So we can take it from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm gonna get started. I'm happy to be interrupted. I'll say sort of as a standing rule. So if I go through something that doesn't totally make sense to you, you can either jot it down and I'm happy to take questions or just pipe up. I don't have much to like screen share. There's no presentation. I'm just gonna kind of run you through where we are. And so I should see you if you raise your hand.
And I will interrupt for 1 second. Sorry, Dan.
Mhm.
Now that you said that. And I also just wanted to say Chris Hart is here as well as our development manager and then or director. And then Michelle Wright has also been as on part of the team for this project. So that's it. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Great. Well, I will introduce myself. So my name is Dan Brittlehoover. I am the Director of Development for M&S Development. We are a company in Brattleboro. I'm sitting on Main Street right now. And we are originally a spinoff of the folks who put together the Brooks House project. Our sort of genesis was when that building caught on fire and was going to fall down. It was slated to be torn down, and Bob Stevens, one of the partners I work for, said, "That'll break my heart. Please don't do that. That will, crush our downtown. We'll figure out how to put it back up." And they did, and they spent $23 million to build an $8 million thing, which takes a lot of good community work and tax credits and grants. And they sort of let the dust settle on that project. And they said, "Hey, I think we figured something out here. There's lots of buildings like this. There are lots of similarly minded community members, and there's a lot of need in our communities." And so since that project, we've been sort of carrying around those same spirits of efforts. And we've done a handful of different kinds of projects in the Brattleboro area. We just finished up our first low-income housing tax credit affordable project on Platt Street that created 15 new affordable units in a historic building. We did another sort of Brooks House scale of a mixed-use project over in Bennington, and then we do some property management as well. So we're managing the Holton home on behalf of the Garden Path Elder Living and leasing that, managing it for staff at the retreat, and a few other smaller things as well. But those are sorts of the types of things that we're doing. And I'm here now working for you folks on Melrose Terrace project. So I'll give you an update on what's happening there. The biggest pieces are, maybe I'll orient first, actually. I'll skip ahead in my own notes. So M&S refers to our project development in different stages. Okay, so stage one obviously comes first. We call stage one feasibility. And within stage one, we even break that into an even smaller piece and call it a 1A and then a 1B. And the 1A is really just a desk level exercise of it. Is this a good idea? Given what we see in the world for, what people can afford to pay in rent, how much does it cost to build a building or rehab a building? How much are interest rates? What could we maybe expect to receive for funding, given that we see other projects are able to win or borrow? Is this a good idea? And we just take all these assumptions, we put them in a spreadsheet, and we look at them together and we say, okay, I think this is a good idea. If we can deliver on all of these assumptions simultaneously, we appear to have a successful thing here. And the biggest piece of that assumption that drives other assumptions within there is the cost of construction. So that's going to be a big one. And so that's our 1B, is we then work with architects and engineers to do the very first, we authorize them to get started on their own work and produce the conceptual designs and the initial, what are called schematic designs, that tell us, how many units might we fit here? How could it be insulated? What's the best use of the space? How big are the apartments? How many of them are going to be accessible or visitable? Or what do we do with that weird upstairs space? We sort of try to answer some of those questions early. What are the goals of, for example, BHP in this project? And we use those designs and we send them off for an independent, we pay for a third-party cost estimate, which is pretty much large general contractors who moonlight on the side, who do takeoffs. And they say, all right, you've got 250 doors and you've got 500 windows and you're going to have to do this many square feet of roofing and drywall and kitchen cabinets and yada, yada. And they give you a cost estimate. And they said, if I put this out to bid right now, this is what I would expect this would cost. And so we take that number back and we look at it compared to what we had sort of guessed in our professional experience in our 1A, and we say, okay, are we still on the playing field? Did we just totally sink our project feasibility, or are we still looking at possible? And so we've just done all of that for Melrose Terrace. And what we got to was the end of the 1B stage, where GB Architecture, the architecture firm from Burlington that you folks hired, worked with myself and Stevens and Associates civil engineers to assess what's there. We hired a historic preservation consultant to help apply to the National Park Service to have the property added to the National Register so that we might be able to use historic tax credits. We did some assessments into the potential return on investment of geothermal as a heating and cooling source to keep our operating expenses lower. We did a few sort of heavy lifting items into the costs of construction, and we feel like generally we're still within our budget. The other area of early feasibility that we do is environmental. That's very often can be a long lead item in the development of a project. You don't want to get to the end of having designed a great, beautiful thing and find out that you've got the skeleton of Exxon Valdez buried in your basement. So we do the early phases of both a NEPA assessment, given that Brattleboro Housing has federal funding and has to comply with federal environmental permitting, as well as state and other types of environmental permitting. And one of the things that we did find, we're not off scot-free. There is some lead paint that has, over the decades, chipped and flaked off the sides of the buildings, out of the window sash, and is in the shallow soils along the drip edges of the building. But there's not any real major unknown smoking guns. So, small cleanup expenses much that about is infinitely better than a large cleanup expense that you do or don't know about. So we learned a lot about that. Another piece of the environmental is I've sort of lumped permitting into environmental as well. Is the site is, as you all know, was the source or was the location of substantial flood damage, and so that led you all down the long path you've been down. And we haven't moved the remaining buildings. We've done a lot of work to re-engineer the floodplain. They did, some fantastic studies to try to identify which buildings do we leave, which ones do we have to take down. Let's do this smart so that we're not going to leave up something we're not going to use, but let's not tear down something we want to keep. And so assessing, what are the elevations of those buildings? How did the floodplain change as a result of your current project? How does that compare to the standards that we'll be held to as we go apply for permits? We looked into those things, become more confident that, yes, this is an appropriate use of these buildings. It's a reasonable place to invest more money. But that said, what should we do to ensure that, living on the edges or the margins of a floodplain, what's just a good idea? What is the best practice for mitigating those risks as best we're able? So we look into that. And the last piece we do is there's a bunch of funding sources. the reality of our projects are that what people can afford to pay for rent doesn't cover our costs to borrow the money to build them. You know, that if everyone paid as what they can, we would certainly never cover the actual construction costs in debt. And so we need some subsidizing funding. So that comes from tax credits and grants. I can talk more about that later, but we basically, you know, I plug in these numbers that I've seen other projects of similar scale win from state and federal funding sources. And I basically call those same funding sources and I say, hi, I'm here on behalf of this project. We think it's an amazing project. And, you know, do you see any reason that we couldn't apply? You know, here you're a nonprofit, you're a housing authority, here's where it is, this is the location, these are the targeted rents we're trying to keep, you know, does this align with your programs? And we get them all sort of just nodding and saying, yeah, you know, in concept and in theory and by entity type, absolutely, we'd welcome your application, please come work with us more. So I go around and I do that for all of our planned funding sources. And so that sort of gets to the end of where we are now. We've got a design with a cost estimate. It's going to make 31 new apartments. We know what are our sort of obstacles as far as permitting and environmental issues. And we know the lay of the land for our landscape for funding and how are we going to pay for this. And when M&S initially submitted our request for proposal to all, we did that on a time and materials hourly basis. We find that what goes into our work to do feasibility studies are very similar across projects of different sizes, scales, use types. That what I just described, whether you're building a hotel or rehabbing Melrose Terrace, is about the same amount of work. From there, to actually go about and do the work is very different and changes dramatically by what's the project like and what are the goals of the owner. You know, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the owner as an applicant or as their financial capacity? You know, how might they pay for this? Do they need to go fundraise to pay for it? Do we need to go fundraise to pay for it? Are we even asked to find investors, or is this all housing tax credits? You know, how do we do it? And so when we submitted, you know, we said we absolutely can get, you know, right through this stage one, as I've described. And then after that, we'll meet with you and we'll see what your goals are. We'll see where we are. You know, we'll try to find out what your priorities are. And we, M&S, will attempt to offer, you know, something that is going to be, you know, not just compatible, but something that we think the structure of our arrangement together is to your benefit, because there are different ways that we could structure that too. And you folks have lived through, I don't know your lives as commissioners if you were around for Red Clover Commons at all, but you know, you've lived through other redevelopment and projects before, and there are different partners out there who, you know, can offer different things, and where you are as an organization at different times in your lifespans, you know, could lead to different ways you would want to do things. And when we met with Christine and Chris and Michelle and sort of pitched our findings and said, you know, this is what we found completing our feasibility studies, and this is what we think is what it sounds like would be valuable to you all. We came to some consensus there, I think, and then went back to our own desks and wrote up those proposals that are in your inbox. And I'll sort of stop because I've been talking for a while, but I do have some sort of like longer term perspectives and like what we see going forward, but I'll take any questions on any of that if anybody has any.
Doesn't look like we have any questions, but thank you for all this information.
Sure. So I'll say that, you know, as far as the schedule and the remaining stages, you know, I just described stages 1A and 1B that we've completed. We call stage 2 funding and design development. And what that means is we actually go apply to all of those funding sources. You know, we engage Federal Home Loan Bank or Vermont Housing Finance Agency or Brattleboro Savings and Loan or whomever it is that we're going to go apply for the grants or the debt or the tax credits from. And we engage their staff and we present the specifics of our project and begin working through the underwriting process. When we've got enough sort of award letters or letters of commitment or term sheets, and we feel like we have, a commitments on our funding stack, all the various sources together, you sort of authorize your architects and say, okay, we got far enough to submit our permits and we think we've won all this money, in concept. And we now, that's when you're sort of recommended to move forward with letting them go through and completing all the rest of the actual construction documents for design. So, no need to sort of buy that ahead of time. They can describe what kind of door hinges to put on your doors after you already know you're definitely going to be buying the doors. And so those sorts of architectural and design elements we sort of save for the end. And that's what we call stage 3, is final design and closing the deal. So that's satisfying any grant or funding conditions, standing up the entity if you're going to create a new LLC who's going to own the project, which you will as a condition of the federal historic tax credits. It'll be a single purpose entity that owns the property and some other things like that. So we do the actual mechanical work to sort of set up the ownership and the transaction for the project. And then stage 4 is fun. That's the construction. So, that's ribbon cutting, building, punch lists, and occupancy. And then there's a couple of months of work after the fact, sort of close out all of those financing sources and convert the tax credits into actual dollars, and then take people out and sort of clean up the project and move on. All in all, that's a roughly 2-year timeline from where we stand today through construction. It's about 5 months of applying for funding. It's about 10 months for final design, permitting, closing on all of those funding sources, and then it's about another, we think, 10 months worth of construction to do that deep rehab on the property. Chris or Christine, any questions or anything I've missed you want me to touch on? Christine, you are muted if you're.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say the only thing I would really, at this point, I think the biggest concern, I'm sure, for the board is just like, how is this financially going to work? These are really large numbers, and how are we going to pay for this? And so I will share a little bit of, so some of this is we have funding specifically called capital fund funding, which is very specific to the Melrose project. Melrose is our only project that we still have. This is going to get a little weedy, right? It's still in public housing. So all of the other properties that we manage that were in public housing, meaning Hayes Court, Samuel and Lade Apartments, Ledgewood, and Moore Court, those are now in what's rental assistance demonstration. So they're funded separately, but different money, right? Different pots of money. So the money that we've received at Melrose, we can't use at those properties. We have to use them at Melrose. And so we've continued to get capital fund money for Melrose, even though people aren't living here. And so we're using that money to be able to, we've used that money so far to pay Dan, not Dan specifically, but M&S. And then we'll continue to use that money for some time. And then that money will, we will run out of that money. And then the next, I guess that's what I think would be helpful for the board to understand. I don't know if Chris, you want to talk a little bit to that, or Dan, where the remaining money will be to pay Dan, and some of that will be development fee money. So I'll let Chris speak to it better than I will be able to.
Well, the first is that the capital fund money was the money that we used as the match for the flood mitigation work. And that, again, Christine pointed out, it can only be used at Melrose. It's public housing money. And we have close to enough for the pre-development dollars that we need, which is the hardest money to get and to have in your back pocket. We're close. We hope that we will get capital fund money for one more year. If that's the case and it's about the same as we have been getting, then we should be, I think we'll be okay. But there's a lot of, what's going to happen to HUD funding and all that, we don't know. When we go to closing, and Dan, you can correct me if I have it wrong, but when we go to closing, then we start to get some money. We get some checks that we walk away with. And we will get a reimbursement for our development expenses to some extent and a portion of our developer fee. All these, when you do these projects, they generate a development fee. M&S is sharing the development fee with us, which is the exact same structure that we had with Evernorth. We do have to take 2/3 of our portion of the development fee and put it back into the development to help pay for it. These things are really expensive, and that's the only way we're going to get it to work. So that will happen, and then that money will get repaid by the development over a period of 10 years. It's tricky because when we go to closing, we will then be taking this project out of public housing. And that will trigger a lot of things, but the overriding item will be that BHP will no longer have any public housing properties at all. And you have to go through quite a big process with HUD. And they're very insistent about it to close out your public housing. And that'll be something that Christine and James and perhaps me will have to do. And the big item there is to make sure that we have protected any and all assets and money that is at Melrose and shifted them out so that when we go to closing, Melrose has nothing and we don't return anything to HUD. If you close out public housing and you have any money in public housing, HUD takes it. So we don't want to have any money in public housing. But that is a big deal because then we won't have capital funding money. And we will need to close that public housing program. It doesn't, as far as I know, there are no other significant ramifications for BHP in closing out its public housing. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I don't think there will be. It's just we'll lose the capital funding, and we have to make sure that we do it at a time and in a way that we ensure that we keep every dollar that we can. And it is possible, and entities do it all the time. It's just you have to be really careful when you do it. So that's one of the big things that for me in thinking about this project, I'm always asking Dan, when are we close and what happens? And because when we close, that's probably when we end public housing and we end the capital fund. So I don't know, that's sort of a little bit aside, but it is a little bit on the money and how we're going to pay for the front end of this. That's really where our big risk is and our expense is this pre-development money that we are spending and that we need to come up with. Does that answer the question, Christine?
It does, yeah, it's helpful. And I think another thing to make note, and we talked a lot about this last, Michelle and Chris and I met on Friday as well, to talk in preparation to this meeting and to kind of formulate some questions, which Chris was really, she put together a good list of questions for Dan. I saw that today, so thanks. And thanks, Dan, for the reply. But the other piece is like if we don't go in this direction, right? Like the capital fund money, we can't there's really nothing we can do with it. I mean, outside of we could use it to demolish the buildings to pay towards that. There really isn't anything else to do with it. But you know, it is a lot of money, and so the board really needs to understand that even though we don't have a lot of options of anything else good to do with it besides tearing the buildings down or redeveloping, you should be aware that it is a substantial amount of money that we're paying regardless of what we do. And if we do nothing, we're still going to lose the money if we take it out of public housing. We're not going to have it for anything else. So I just want to make the board aware of that.
I should say that back like 20 years ago, right after Irene, when we knew Melrose needed to have something happen to it, we applied for it's called Section 18. It's a nightmare of regulations. And that was where we agreed with HUD that we would eventually discontinue Melrose as public housing. So we've sort of we've made that promise, and we made it, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's something that, HUD is very interested in us doing, because they frankly don't want to, when I talked to them and they really realized that they still owned Melrose, they freaked out. They were like, it floods. Wait a minute, we don't want it. So we do, there are things that have been put in place a decade ago. And we're going to have to, fulfill those. So whether we redevelop this property or not, we are under an obligation to close Melrose as public housing. So that's something we're going to have to do in the next few years, regardless. And it makes more sense to me to redevelop it and then close it and use the money that way. Just my opinion.
I'll put a plug in for our stages that I was describing earlier as well. If you read some of the fine print of the scope items that are within the development proposal, there are some go, no-go decision points built into completing some of those scope items. And we have those very purposefully. M&S is both a development consultant, and that's sort of half of what we do. And the other half of what we do is we do this on our own balance sheet for projects for ourselves. And so this is a process that we utilize where we do not have a capital fund. We have the bank account that has all of our salaries in it, and so we cannot squander it. And so we very carefully, attempt to, as early as possible, retire as much development risk as possible. And so we attempt to sort of orient these questions in a way that we can answer the pieces that have the biggest outstanding risk to our project overall, and answer them as early as possible, so that as you get closer and closer and closer to the end, you have more and more and more confidence that you're just sort of fine tuning the details rather than sort of working on the same levels of things all the way through. And so when it comes to, making that decision about, are we going to keep investing our capital fund money here, or should we pivot to do something else? I think sounds like from this discussion, that's where those conversations should live, is at those go, no go decision points.
And the biggest one that we have right up front, which is great, is an application to the Federal National Park Service for historic designation of the property. There's a lot of money, as you look at the detail, in historic tax credits and other things tied to that designation. And I was very happy to find out that the state approved what is a very good submission in January on the 8th, and it's now gone to the feds. They have to act within 30 days. So we should hear by February 8th or thereabouts. And that will be a big moment for us, because if it's a no, then we really need to think seriously about what are we going to do? And is there any way possible to make up for the funding gap created by the lack of a federal designation? So I think that's a date to circle on your calendars and put Christine on your speed dial and say, what did you hear?
It is a consequential determination. I don't know how interested anyone is in getting into the weeds of the funding, but there are some tax credits that are called entitlements, where if you are qualified for them, you get them. You don't have to really like competitively apply. If you meet the requirements of the Department of Interior for historic preservation and you are a qualified property, you get the tax credits. It's not an uncertainty of, will I get the credits? It's, you do the work, you send us your invoices, we'll give you 20% of that back. That's the deal. And so that's how that funding source works. And the other the largest funding source in here is a non-competitive low-income housing tax credit program. There are two kinds of low-income housing tax credits. One is highly competitive and gives 70% of your project's worth of subsidy. The other is infinitely uncompetitive because Vermont isn't able to really figure out how to use it because it doesn't quite close the funding gap. And that gives this project 39% of our funding. So by having the 39% and the historic, it sort of covers just enough of the gap that we can ask some of these smaller state funds for the rest. And that's where the funding comes from. So with the historics, we would have 2/3 of the funding for the project buttoned up in the form of either non-competitive or entitlement tax credits.
Everyone's head exploding.
Yeah,
I know
sorry.
it's a lot.
Too
It's
far.
a
I
lot
always
to
go
take
too
in.
far.
But
Yeah.
the last thing that I will say for the board is that M&S has a very thoughtful process. I worked a little with Dan on their work at Mountain Home. They're very rigorous and they're very thoughtful. I think that I would hope that the board would have a fairly good level of confidence in the materials and the analysis that M&S is doing. I don't think, and I'm a pretty critical reader of this stuff. I don't see anything in there that I think is just fluff. It's just, they just made that up. They don't really know. When they don't know, they tell us. So I think that's important. It's very important that you have confidence in your development partner, especially given that this is a new partner. The BHP has always worked with Evernorth. They were too busy to do this project. But M&S has been, I've been very pleased, and they're very upfront and very honest with us. I ask really niggly, questions, and they answer them all. Even if they can't, they tell me they can't. So that's worth noting, I think, for the board.
That's really good to hear. Thank you, Chris, for that. And I agree. Reading over this proposal, it gave me a lot of confidence in M&S. So I think we're ready for a motion if no one else has any more comments or questions. No? Okay. So may I have a motion to authorize Christine Hazard to sign both agreements?
Authorize Christine Hazard. I first the motion.
May I have a second?
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
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 Okay,
Great.
great. And I just wanted to say thank you all. Thank you for listening and thank you for asking your questions. It's a lot of information, but I also wanted to just say a huge thank you to Dan. He's been a real pleasure to work with so far. I am not experienced in this. I've been through some housing development, but I haven't actually, been through the stage ever, even though I closed on all the documents for RCC2 with the hope that everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. But so I've learned a lot and Dan has been really patient with that. And I will just also say thank you to Chris for all her knowledge and experience. That's been really, really helpful. And she's very patient with me, and for Michelle for also coming on board and asking great questions. And so it's been a great experience so far. So I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
And I'll say, the M&S team, we are all Brattleboro based. We live in Dummerston, Guilford, and Brattleboro, and wherever. But this is where we go grocery shopping. This is our community. Also, it's where our kids play sports, and so when we get an opportunity to apply what we think we do well towards something that we know will do good, then it's a nice place for us to get to work Monday through Friday. So we look forward to, unfortunately, probably being a large part of your board meetings in the future. Sorry.
I saw the sign for your office and I had no idea what it was.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, we previously used the office space in the Stevens and Associates, which is the space directly above where that sign is. But we kind of outgrew, we're not all in the office at the same time, but we're all pretty much doing this all day. And so if we are all in the office at the same time, it was just like an open office where we're all trying to be on Zoom all day, and it just was not. So we had to expand a little bit.
So that's your office in the old Brattleboro building, I believe it was. Used to be?
Yep. Yep,
Okay.
that's it. Yeah, Bob Stevens has owned this building for 30 something years.
Just say thank you, Dan, and thank you, Chris, for the time and effort and all the energy you put into this and believing that these things are possible. Thank you.
Hard work.
Yeah,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure.
You're welcome. And
Yep.
I really look forward to this next piece of Melrose. I can't seem to, get out of here. Maybe when this is done, I'll finally leave.
No, you won't. They'll call you right back.
Yeah.
It's
Be
never
careful
enough.
what you wish for. We have a lot of employees who leave and then come right back. I don't know what it is. So it seems to be a pattern. People like it here. Oh,
It's
I
a
don't
good
know
place.
why.
It's a great place to work, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So are we ready for the safety committee update?
Yeah. So Dan and
All right.
Chris,
Yeah.
don't feel like
Thank
you have
you,
to
Dan.
stay. I know people have dinners probably ready. Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. I look forward to working with you.
Thanks.
Dan.
Yeah, so safety committee, to be quite honest, not a lot of progress has happened since we met last at the end of last month. It's the early month. I took last week off, so the holidays and everything. But I am meeting with staff tomorrow, so we have a plan in place to sort of talk a little bit about more like what that looks like and who wants to be involved in that. And so we did have a resident meeting that we're hoping to schedule for this week at RCC2. We've had some real illness in that building, a lot of different types of illness. And so we didn't think it was like the best time to bring everyone together in one space. So we're going to give it a week and see if it clears out a little. We can open the doors and do some, cleaning. But yeah, so we're going to do that and have that conversation. So it is still in progress, but we haven't really gotten as far as we'd hoped yet. So we will be working on that a lot in the new year for sure.
Great, more to come. Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Michelle, Christine and I met, and Christine has discussed this with her team, and developed this list of proposed data points. So, that's what this last sheet is. So Michelle or Christine, would you like to mention anything notable about this list?
Just say that Michelle has already started to put together some metrics, ways of measuring this, and some tools for me. And I got that last week when I was out. I started to look at it and shared it with some of our property manager, with the people on our team. I will say one thing around resident satisfaction. So the number of the complaints, um, I think that'll be interesting to look at. Actionable complaints in comparison. I think that will be interesting for the board to look at. What we're also planning on doing is diving in each month. So identifying per property, like what the complaints are about. Like, is it smoking? Is it, whatever. 99% of them are around other residents' behavior. So we know that. If that changes, then we'll have to make a note of that. But what we're measuring now are really about like tenant on tenant, tenant complaining about another tenant. That information will be coming to you every month. I said to them, that just feels like that's too much minutia. But I do think like whether we do it at the end of the month or at the half year, to have an overall like, yes, like 90% of their complaints are around this, or I think that would be helpful for the board in the direction of like where we go. I think for us, it would be helpful because we'll dive into the minutia, like, oh, this is at Sam Elliott and we're seeing this. This is at Red Clover. We're seeing this. Why is that happening? How is that change? That's going to help the property managers to do their job better. I don't think that that's necessarily information the board is going to be able to do anything with, but I do think the overall understanding of like what the trends are and if they're going up or down, I do think that's important for the board to know. And then maybe at the end of the year, you get like a pretty clear synopsis of like, this is what this is what we saw.
Yeah, and I think I'm really grateful that people took the time to think about what it was in their areas that they might want to track, and I think that that's really essential. It doesn't do any good to track something that you don't care about or that you don't believe in or something like that. As far as the board's receiving of the information, I personally would, also just be comfortable, receiving it less often if you thought that that was better, Christine, like once a quarter, or there could be some sort of in January, that's when we hear about Section 8, and in February, that's when we hear about, this or that, or whatever, and it could be sort of longer, you know, trends or whatever. Certainly doesn't, however you want to use it. I I think I would be comfortable with something like that too.
I think like getting it rolling and like seeing what it looks like and then I don't think it's going to be super labor intensive to print it out once a month. If we're putting that information in, I don't think it's going to be hard, but I do think figuring out like what it is that we really want to be looking at, I think we'll learn that as we're going, right? And so I think this is a good place to start.
So, Christine, you're going to put something together like a rubrics, high, middle, low, which one's, really the most intense out of the whole compiling what you're going to do basically, and that'll determine what steps to take next.
Are you talking, you mean for the complaints, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah. I don't know if we'll complete a rubric. I mean, what we've done is we've created like a template that basically says like Samuel Elliott Apartments and like this number of complaints this month were smoking related. This number of complaints were related to noise. This number of complaints were related to guests, So like we'll have that and then we can see it over time. It's going to be really, I think like once we dive into the data though, I do think like we're going to come up with some things that are going to make things really skewed, right? So like we might get 20 complaints from one person about one thing. That's gonna really skew those numbers. So the board would be like, you got 100 complaints in this month, and then you realize like they're all from the same person by the same, like, so we have to kind of tease that out a little bit so that we really know, and that's what we know in-house, right? Like we're dealing with these complaints every day. Like, so we get the complaints, we file them, we write a response, we review them. We're taking action steps all the time with this. It's not like we just get the complaints and they go in a box and we don't think about them. It's like we are dealing with them on a daily basis, which is the bigger job, right? But this is more of like kind of giving an understanding of like what does this really look like? And I will be honest, I think it's going to be hard to figure out like what we're trying to measure until we start measuring it and then be like, does that even give us the information we're looking for? Or is that like, so I think that out of all the things, the complaints is going to be the hardest thing, but it's also really time consuming. So I feel like by breaking it down by month, it's going to be much easier. It's like when I look at the complaints for the last year and I look at the whole book, my head just spins because I'm like, oh my God, it's going to take a week to like just go through this because we've filed all of these complaints. I think really doing it per month will be easier to get a better handle on what's going on. And then I think you're right, Gary, like we'll be able to look at that and be like, wow, we got a lot of smoking complaints. Were they from all the same person? Were they from all different people? Like what is going on? And then we can really figure out, well, how are we gonna actively address that? I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you because some things do overlap. It's the same one, when you're trying to narrow it down to what most complaints are about. Is it about a washer dryer? Is it about noise? Is it about smoking? Is it about this? And just seeing if it's the same person or the same individuals, how the safety committee did. This is the zone or Chief Hardy did. This is a particular area that's had the most complaints and things like that. Just interesting to see how you're going to go forward with that. And if you need any help, I'll help you.
Okay, sounds good. I know I forgot that you were on that committee, so that would be probably good. And then the other measurements are really around really like numbers, like utilization of the program, number of vacancies. I mean, those are good things for us just to track in general. I mean, at the end of the year, we have to submit reports, so it's not, I think that will be an easy thing to track, but it will give us some helpful information. And then really legal as well. I think that is something that when we're like, oh my gosh, we evicted, let's say, 2 or 3 families last year, that feels huge. But in reality, when you look at like, well, these were like, we actually started with 30 households that were receiving letters because they were behind on their rent. And actually, we only ended up, we only had one family. And maybe next year we won't have any families evicted for non-payment. Wouldn't that be lovely? And like, then we can measure that and see what that looks like. And I think over time, I think that would be helpful because those numbers can be misconstrued as well. Like people ask us, well, how many people do you have under eviction? And I'll say, well, let's say we have 3 that we're going to court. Well, and then they ask me next month, and I'm like, we still have 3. It's still the same 3. It's not 3 new ones, and I think that's what gets confusing for people. Like we won't, and then at the end of the year, we'll have a better understanding of like really what that looks like. And I think since um, COVID, since the VRAP program ended, we saw such an increase in people not being current with their rent. And we've been really, before COVID, we worked so hard at it. We were in such a good place. COVID happened, everything changed. And now we're really getting people back to where they need to be. We're doing the recertification every 3 years. There's lots of things on the side of the tenant at this point. So we're hoping that we really see, I would like to see a year where no one is evicted for non-payment. For cause is a little out of my control. Like I can't control people's behavior, right? I can't make that determination. I have to hold people accountable for certain behaviors. I don't have a choice. But for non-payment, I think that we have a lot more that we can do to support residents in getting rent paid so that we don't get to that point. And hopefully for cause too. You know.
Thanks. So any other questions or comments about data? Okay. We already talked about the BHOI, but is there anything else that you'd
Nope.
like to
The only
update?
update is just that we have 4 active members who are really fun to work with. And we have, and they're really thoughtful, and we've been working on the bylaws, and we've got some really smart people in the room. It's like they're really, really good. We have I don't know if I've shared with the board who is on the board. So it's Constantine von Krusenstern is now the board chair. We have Jen Sutton Smith, who is on the board, who joined us. Prudence McKinney as well. I think many of you know Prudence from the hospital. And then Jan Anderson, who was the former assistant to the town manager or town manager's assistant. And she is so like, detail oriented. If anyone remembered working with her as when she worked in the town manager's office, she was the most detail oriented person I'd ever seen. And
He's the
so
glue. She
yeah,
was
so
the glue
she's
there.
and to be fair, Jessica right now is wonderful too. So, but if anybody's watching this, but she really is great at this. So we've been really going through the bylaws, and I think she has a paralegal background. So really, and so between the four of them, they are just really good at this. So it's been a lot of fun to do the bylaws, which are not a fun. That would not be my idea of fun. I'm not good at that. So having their help has been really great.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all great. You got a perfect team.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting. Great. So, may I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion that we adjourn to till February.
May I have a second? Sorry about that.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you
Okay.
all. Have a
Yeah.
good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year.
Too.
Happy New Year.